Thank you so much. It's kind of fun to be the anchor guy here. You guys are all surprised because I look like I'm the AV guy. And I'm actually also the caterer. I made all the ham sandwiches. And I'm also doing the cameras, so it's 3 or 4 jobs in one. And that's what we're trying to do to stretch your nonprofit dollar. You get a lot of value here at FCCT. Last night, actually, we had a board meeting, and I was on the phone attending the board meeting, and I was reading bedtime stories to my son James at the same time. So there was one ear on the phone and doing the bedtime stories. And James asked what I was doing, because when I'm in town, I always have to read the bedtime stories. It's the most important job that I have. And I said, what do you think I'm doing? And he said, I think you're talking to a bunch of doctors about cancer in Africa. And I said, that's exactly what I'm doing, because that's what we do all the time at our house. We talk to doctors about cancer in Africa. And James said, Dad, I got it figured out. I figured out what it is you need to do. And I said, what is it, James? He's 6. He said, what you need to do is outnumber cancer. And I thought about that for a second. I said, James, what does it look like to outnumber cancer? And he said, here's what you got to do. You got to get all the doctors, and you got to line up all the doctors. And then you got to line up all the people in Africa that have cancer and blast them. Which is 6-year-old speak for treat them, right? I mean, he kind of understands radiation therapy, but it's a blast, right? It's a blast. And he said, if you can do that, I think you can extinct cancer. And I said, I think you're right. I'd love to extinct cancer. And he said, the next step is to get everybody to quit cigaretting. So if we can quit cigaretting, we can maybe extinct cancer. It's really fun for me to be here tonight. Africa is a place that I absolutely love. I've been traveling there for about the last 20 years. I actually started college probably a little bit too early. And by the time I was 17, I was burned out, and I was ready to get as far away from home as possible. And so I kind of spun the globe around, and I put my finger on it, and I found Tanzania in Kenya. And so I signed up to head over there for about 4 months when I was 17 years old. And if you're a kid like I am who's born on a farm in Iowa, and you suddenly find yourself in Tanzania, this is a pretty exciting experience, right? Because all your senses are just totally overloaded. I mean, your senses of smell, of sight, the colors, the music, the sounds, just the feeling of being in Africa, the dirt on your feet, everything kind of gets into your skin and just as quickly gets into your soul. And it's a magical experience as it sort of washes over you, this cultural experience. And I had a job there, at least it was kind of a fake job. I was on assignment, and our mission was to track a zebra migration across East Africa. So we started kind of up by Somalia, and we headed down across Kenya, and we finished down in the Loita Hills on the north side of Kilimanjaro. And my guide for all of this was this extraordinary guy named Simpati. And Simpati is a Maasai warrior. And all of you have seen the Maasai, these impossibly tall men who look like they come out of some kind of old storybook. He just wore kind of a loincloth. He had his earlobes stretched very long. His hair was braided and dyed bright red. And he walked carrying a spear. And he needed that spear because one of the things he had to do as a Maasai warrior was to hunt a lion with his bare hands. And before his time as a warrior was complete, he had to hunt the lion with his bare hands and then take the hide of the lion back to his home village so he could be let back in and become a tribal elder at the age of 33. And this was a guy that knew how to start a fire with his bare hands. He got out of the tent one morning, and he looked up at the sky, and he said, in 5 days, it will rain. And it did. So this is the perfect hero for a little farm kid from Iowa. And the months kind of dragged on, and the expedition began to come to a close. And one night I was laying in my tent, probably about 3 o'clock in the morning. I heard the zip. And I looked up, and I could see Simpati, not really see Simpati, but I could see his eyes, right? These giant white eyes like saucers in the night. And he said, shh. And for the first time ever, I could hear his voice quivering. And he said, Kubwa, Simba, large lion. And then I heard the sound, he, because lions have a very poor respiratory system. The way you actually hear them is they're breathing, as they're in the campsite, kind of going through our food next to where our campfire had been that night. And then he paused for a second, his eyes got a bit bigger, and he said, Kubwa, Kubwa, Simba. There were 2 large lions. And it was the first and the only time I ever saw Simpati afraid. And I carried that idea with me. It was not a fun thing, but my time in Africa came to a close as quickly as it began. And I had to do something that was unthinkable to me as a young boy, and I had to come back and go to work. And before I went to work, there was a whole lot of studying that had to take place, and I ended up working for a law firm in Washington, D.C. And all of us have very strange cancer journeys, and I think mine is no different. My first job working in Washington, D.C. was actually working for Philip Morris. So I spent about 2 years living in a highly confidential document archive, reading all of Philip Morris's medical research about what they knew and when, learning about their products, what they did, how they figured it out, when they knew, and working together with this team to figure out a defense on how to get them off the hook. After about 2 years of doing that, I decided I really didn't want to do that anymore. Yeah, medical school, or pardon me, law school was expensive, but there were other ways to pay the bill. And so I moved back to the Midwest and started a little practice in Des Moines. And it was about that time that I got a call from this guy. And this is one of my heroes, a guy named Doug Ullman, who's the CEO of the Livestrong Foundation. And Doug and Lance Armstrong had this great idea. And they realized as a little charity at the time that they were never going to raise as much as the American Cancer Society. They could never really shape cancer research in that same way. So what they decided to do was actually invest in lobbying. They wanted to start to shape a grassroots campaign to impact politics, first of all focusing on presidential politics, on presidential campaigns, with the idea that sooner or later one of those knuckleheads that ran for president would become the president, and it might help shape policy from the top down. So at this point, I'd climbed Mount Everest. I'd made an attempt to swim the English Channel, and Lance Armstrong was looking for young people that were athletic and hopefully articulate and could help them achieve this goal. So we started this very wonderful advocacy initiative, in many ways using the things that I'd learned working for the bad guys, now kind of turning my skills for the forces of good instead of the forces of evil. And it was our first trip to DC, and I was sitting at the ESPN Zone in downtown Washington. I was having dinner with Lance Armstrong and Doug Ullman. And I realized at this dinner that I was the only person on the team that had not been diagnosed with cancer. And I found myself apologizing to these two guys that I hadn't had cancer. And Doug kind of laughed, and he said, "It's okay." He said, "You will someday." And I thought, what a strange thing to say to somebody. You know, at the time, we know the statistic, right? It's 1 in 2 men will have cancer in their lifetimes, more than 1 in 3 women. So cancer is something that touches all of our lives, and really all you have to do is wait. And unfortunately for us, it was about 3 years after that dinner that my wife, Kate, was diagnosed with cancer. And for us, that was a very difficult time. And after her diagnosis, you know, we laughed. And we cried, and we hugged, and we argued, and fought, and screamed. And we did all of those things because all of those reactions are the appropriate reaction to a cancer diagnosis. And after sort of the fallout finished, and we could sort of stabilize our family, we started to look around and reevaluate. And one thing that we decided and realized was that in our professional careers, we had sort of begun to spend a lot of time surrounding ourselves with stuff. And we had really begun to define ourselves and our success by the material possessions that we had begun to accumulate. And what we realized with the test of that cancer diagnosis was all that stuff was very, very meaningless. And our lives weren't fulfilled and didn't have the meaning that we were really now seeking. And so we decided to hit the reset button. And one thing that we realized was the thing that we really valued in our life had really been the experiences that we had shared. And we had been very blessed. We'd had the opportunity to achieve many of our own dreams in life. But what we realized is something much bigger than achieving your own dream is committing your time to give birth to the dreams of others. And so at this point, in addition to my law practice, I was working in the Department of Global Health at the medical school in Des Moines. And it had been about 8 years since I'd been to Nepal for the first time. And we had come to learn in that period of time that it was about 100 times more likely that a woman would die trying to give birth if she was in Nepal than she would if she was in the United States. It's about as likely, if you're a woman in Nepal, that you're going to die during childbirth as you are to lose your bags or have them delayed during domestic air travel in the US. So as part of Kate's cancer journey, we were told that it was unlikely she would be able to have more children. And so suddenly this incredible gift, we had a little 3-year-old at the time, was all the more sacred. And we wanted to give that sacred gift to other people. So we decided to commit 1 year, take a sabbatical, raise some money, and train 1,000 nurse midwives in Nepal. And we did it in partnership with Save the Children. And it was truly this extraordinary experience. We sold our house, we got out from under our mortgage, we sold one of our cars, we sold all of our stuff, and we just headed off in pursuit of this dream. And at the end of the road, you know, we realized the meaning and the fulfillment that we were seeking had really been delivered more than we ever could have imagined. And we'd really found what it was we were looking for. And we realized, I guess ironically, that none of that would have happened had Kate not been diagnosed with cancer. And so we started for the first time seeing cancer as a starting point for us rather than an ending point. And so we started talking about what it would be like to help other cancer survivors see that same thing. Help them see cancer as a beginning instead of an end. So the place we started was we went back and we found Dr. Deming, who was the head of the team that treated Katie during her cancer journey. And Dr. Deming is a big fan of Lance Armstrong and an avid cyclist. And so that next summer, we sponsored a team of 8 cancer survivors and professional caregivers to race their bicycles across the United States. And they did it 3,000 miles in less than 7 days. And we had a lot of fun, and we thought, all right, maybe cancer is a starting point. You know, maybe cancer can be an opportunity to inspire people and find that meaning and fulfillment in their lives. And so we hooked up with Dave Benson and the American Cancer Society, and we took a team of 37 cancer survivors and caregivers to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And we made a film this time, which was distributed by PBS. This idea of a cancer journey beginning your life. And then we thought, all right, if we can inspire people, maybe we can inspire people to actually do something good, raise money. And so the next summer, we put together a team of 160 cancer survivors and caregivers to run 4,000 miles across the United States. And they raised about $750,000 as they did it. And these were extraordinary experiences for me. I mean, the meaning and the fulfillment that was coming from working with these folks was more than I ever could have imagined. But at the same time, there was something that kept kind of clawing at me. And it came from these experiences. A lot of these journeys involve going to places like Nepal and Tanzania. And as you meet the local people and your eyes start to move from those high mountain peaks down into the villages, you realize that there are people that are dealing with more fundamental issues. Here I was working so hard to inspire cancer survivors to live their life to their full, to pursue sport and hobbies and trips. And because they're born here, the blessing of being born in this time and in this place, they have the opportunity to do that. And here was an entirely another community that had just been totally overlooked, whose needs were just so simple and basic that they just wanted to get to the next day. And so it was about this time I started thinking about this issue that we call the veil of ignorance. And the veil of ignorance is a psychological theory, and it sort of imagines this hypothetical situation that all of mankind could sort of come together up in heaven, up in the sky, before we come down here onto earth. And what sort of conversation would we have up there in the clouds, looking down at the earth, knowing what we know of this place? Knowing that some individuals come down here and they are born into extraordinary wealth. They can buy an Airbus triple-decker airplane for their private aircraft. They can live in a 26-story home. You know, they can have cell phones made out of solid gold. And there's other people that come down to the same place and they don't have enough money for a handful of rice. And I think if the people in this room were sitting up in that cloud looking down at the world, we would probably enter some social contracts. And it would probably say something like, you know what, if you get sick and I'm the guy that happens to have the cure in my hand, and it really won't cost me anything to give it to you, I'm just going to go ahead and let you have it. And you know, if I'm the guy that happens to be born and I've got a field full of corn and you're the guy that doesn't have any food because you live in a desert, I'm going to go ahead and give you that handful of rice. And we might all just make these agreements to look after one another. But what I realize is somehow when we're born into this place, you know, the materiality of this existence is just so overwhelming. And that American existence, just like the African existence, washes over you. The American existence washes over you. And our priorities change. And so it's about that time that the phone rang. And I got a call from this guy. And this is a young doctor, a radiation oncologist who was working at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. And he said, hey, Charlie, we followed the whole Kilimanjaro thing. We're super psyched, and we want to do that too. And so Dr. Doherty had put together a group of cancer survivors and cancer doctors and other individuals from the community to go over to Africa and to have an expedition to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And they used it as a fundraiser to raise money to start this cancer center project. But the really cool thing about this program was that at the end of the climb, they organized this 2-day symposium, which was really unlike anything I'd ever seen. What made it so special is that it was full of many of the top doctors in the United States, I think at least 5 of whom are in the audience here tonight. Many of the top doctors from Tanzania. And they got together over 2 days and they filled this room. And they talked about sort of what we have a handful of and what your hand might be missing. And they started to kind of talk a little bit about this social contract, about what sort of opportunity can come if these two different parties that have these incredible disparities could just start to work together. And it was honestly the most inspirational 2 days that I've ever spent. It was absolutely incredible. And what I realized in that 2 days is three very simple things. The first thing is in the next few years, cancer is going to be the leading cause of death in Tanzania. And it's going to be responsible for more deaths than malaria, HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis combined. Imagine that, combined. And in that same period of time, about 96% of the people will receive absolutely no treatment. And what's crazy about it is the intervention is so inexpensive. Here, a course of radiation therapy maybe costs, what, $40,000, $50,000? Over there, we think we can do it for maybe $2 a treatment. And so it's literally a no-brainer. And the other thing we learned is Tanzania really isn't any special place. This project could happen anywhere, but it has to happen somewhere. We absolutely have to get started because this isn't a very simple intervention. It's going to take a lot of smart people that are super passionate to start to put this thing in place. And so one thing I learned, I've been working in global health projects for a long time, is that we sit over here in sort of our ivory towers in the West and we come up with these big ideas. And we sort of dress them up and package them and we take them off to foreign land and say, aren't you so happy that we brought you this thing? And oftentimes here in our ivory towers, the thing that we come up with is not really the thing that the people want or need. And one thing I've learned is that if you have an uninvited intervention, all it is a money pit. Nothing is going to happen unless you've got local buy-in. And so I came back and I started talking with Tom and John and Mike and Mark and the others. And I said, I want to go back. I want to spend a month in Tanzania and I really want to learn more about what's happening there. I want to meet the local people and I want to really understand this intervention. And so I got an invitation from Dr. Diefenthal, who is really one of the giants of healthcare in Tanzania. Dr. Diefenthal's got the most incredible life story. His father was a Jewish man in Berlin in Germany during World War II, persecuted by the Nazis. Helmut found his faith as a Lutheran, was put on a train to the Battle of Stalingrad as a medic after being kicked out of medical school for his Jewish ancestry. And he made a commitment to God during that train ride that if he survived the war and the Nazis, that he would devote his life to service. He survived the war and the Nazis, got back into medical school after swimming across the river out of East Berlin into West Berlin, and shortly thereafter joined the Lutheran Church and headed off for his first assignment in Malaysia. He's been working in Tanzania for about the last 30 years, and he's responsible for training over 60% of the radiologists in the country. So every district in Tanzania now has a radiologist trained by this man. So I was extremely honored. Yeah, some people want to. And so I was very, very honored and felt blessed to have the opportunity to accept his invitation and spend a month following him around, working with him, dare say annoying him as he tried to do his work at KCMC Hospital in Moshi. And this is a place that it can be a pretty challenging place to work. Most of the doctors who are successful here are successful because they believe that they've been called to this work. This is a place that if you're there for any other reason other than believing that you have a fundamental human obligation to do this work, it's very difficult to do. The wards are all overfilled. The hallways, most of the time, are filled with cots and stretchers. And as you spend time in the hospital, you realize very quickly that there are a lot of needs in Tanzania. There's a lot of needs in the medical world in Tanzania. And so I really wanted to find a reason not to build a cancer center there. And so I started talking to a lot of the young doctors, the local doctors, just incredible people. Just a simple aside here, this is Fatma, the Muslim woman here looking at the wall. This is actually Dr. Diefenthal's replacement. At the age of 90, Dr. Diefenthal decided to come back to the Twin Cities. He's been here for about 2 months now. And this young woman replaced him. So while I was talking to her one day, I asked her, do you think it's an interesting story at all that Helmut's dad was a Jewish man who was persecuted by the Nazis? He became a Lutheran missionary, came to Tanzania, and now you, as a Muslim woman, are replacing him. And she looked at me and she was offended by the question. She said, I never knew that Helmut's dad was Jewish. I never knew that Helmut was Lutheran, and I don't consider myself to be a Muslim woman. She said, in Tanzania, we focus on our shared identity, our shared goals. and not these irrelevant differences? Well, I was put in my place by that question. But as I tested them and tried to come up with the excuse not to build a cancer center there, I realized very quickly why we had to. And the story was that many of these young doctors had been touched by cancer as we all have. You know, one of the issues of biggest concern in Tanzania in the next 5 years, cervical cancer will be the leading cause of death in Tanzania, irrespective of gender. Cervical cancer, which only one gender can get, will be responsible for more deaths than anything else in Tanzania. It's an extraordinary idea. And it's something here we can fix very simply. You know, very few people die of cervical cancer in the US. And in Tanzania, you go to the hospital, the women line up, the women are diagnosed, sometimes after 2 or 3 weeks, and the women are sent home to die. Fundamental care is not available. And when mothers and sisters die in these African families, everything collapses. It's like the thread that holds this social fabric together is just gone. And so the doctors there, they know that there's a cure, they know that there's a treatment, and they want it so badly. Because of all the problems they have, this is the one thing that they think they can fix. And so over 3 weeks there, we made a lot of friends. And a lot of our friends were really sick. This is a friend of mine named Siddiqui, and Siddiqui came into the hospital. He's about 5'10". He probably weighed about 100 pounds. He came into the hospital in a wheelchair and instantly took about 6 pints of blood. His bone marrow had stopped producing red blood cells. He felt a lot better after he got some red blood cells. And very quickly they determined that he had lymphoma, a lymphoma that would be very easy to treat here in the US. There was just no care available. And so he was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. And, you know, the tests were done, the blood was administered, but the reality was there was just no treatment. And so after 3 weeks in the hospital, a lot of papers were signed and written and completed, and Siddiqui was sent home. So I was there, and while he was there, I had insisted that every test be given, anything that he needed be provided to him, and I would pay the bill. And every day his brother came to visit him. And there were two boys, 4 years apart. And I have 2 boys, 4 years apart. And every day the younger brother came with this pot of meat and sat there, you know, holding his brother's hand as they sat together and prayed and ate this meat, shared this meal together. And on the last day I went to the cashier and it took me 4 hours just to pay the bill. It was $163. And we packed him up and headed back out, and I don't speak much Swahili, they didn't speak much English, so we're having kind of a conversation trying to figure out where we're going to go next. And so we headed out of the hospital down the main drag, this big highway, and we drove for about 45 minutes down that highway. And we got off the highway onto Peripheral Road, and we drove down that road for another half hour, and then we got off of that road onto another little dirt trail. And I started thinking, how did these guys even get to the hospital? I mean, we were 2 hours drive in my 4-wheel drive vehicle now, and these guys had no car. And we got to the end of the dirt road, and we just started driving across a field. And after we drove through this field, the sun is setting. It's taken all day. And there was this little enclave with about 4 huts that were made out of dirt. Thatched grass roofs. And I've got the film crew with me, right? We're kind of filming this. We're trying to figure out what this is all about. And I told them, I said, you guys have to turn off the cameras. I said, we can't tell anybody about this. I said, if we go back to America and we tell the story about the guy that lives in a mud hut and we're trying to build a cancer center for him, everybody's going to want to build him a house. They're going to want to dig him a well. They're going to want to find him a job. They're not going to want to build him a cancer center. And we walked into his house, and he had about 6 little kids there, and his parents were there, mom and dad, and we helped Siddiqui sort of lay down in this bed. And I knew that that was the bed that he was going to die in. And his little siblings were rubbing my arm because they'd never seen white skin before. They wanted to see what it felt like. And it was so dark in this room. And we sat there, and I realized, you know, there were a lot of things about Siddiqui's life that I didn't understand. A lot of things. It was a fundamentally different paradigm than the paradigm that I exist in. But here was a guy that was the agent of free will. He did choose to live in this village. There were a lot of other places that he could live. He'd found his way to Moshi, to the hospital. He could have easily found his way to Moshi, to the factory there, or one of the shops, or a role in the tourist trades. There were a lot of things that he could do. He did have a little farm. He had some cows. He was able to provide for this little family. And what I realized was, really, Siddiqui was happy with everything else. The only thing he wasn't happy about was having cancer. And the only time he had asked us for help was for the one thing that we actually have an opportunity to provide. And so I was sitting in this dark house and looking around at all these big wide eyes staring at me. And I realized I was back where I started. 20 years earlier, here I am in the tent, in the darkness, in the night. But the roles had been reversed. They were all scared out of their minds. They didn't know what was going to happen next. They didn't understand the lion. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't know what that lion was going to do next. And I was the only person in that room with that big spear. And now it's our job to walk back out of that village and take on that lion. So it's been terrific to have you guys all here tonight. We're blown away by all of you guys coming out. And we have a party favor for you. It's your usual charity party favor. We're going to ask you to do a bunch of stuff. And so on your way out, we made this little card for you. And these are some of the kids that I worked with in Tanzania. As Mark spoke about earlier, the childhood cancers there have an extraordinary prevalence, and it's something that we can fix pretty easily. So I gave you a little picture of those guys, and you can put that up on your fridge and remember what it is that we're fighting for. And on the back's a few ideas of how you can fight if you'd like to be involved in the fight. And the first is pretty simple. It's to subscribe to our newsletter. And if you just actually, on your way out, write your name on that little sheet and your email address, we'll be happy to just keep you in touch and let you know what we're doing, and we'll send you some fun things every now and then. The second thing is everybody's on Facebook, right? Even my mom's on Facebook now, so join us on Facebook. If you're on Twitter, I just started tweeting last week, so you can get on Twitter and you can follow FCCT, and you can connect with me there too now. And also, I think they mentioned earlier, there is the opportunity to become a member of FCCT. We are a member-owned organization, and our first annual meeting will be in April. So if you have a real passion beginning to brew in you for this work, please consider membership. It's $1,000, which has got to be the best deal I've ever heard of to become a member of an organization like this. And we do have a site visit planned in the spring. So if you have an interest in going to Tanzania, if you haven't been there, you should come. And there'll be a couple different opportunities. We're going to have a Kilimanjaro climb. There'll be an option actually not to go to the summit. We'd like to have a trip that's more of a circumambulation of the mountain, so we'll kind of go through all 5 climate zones, but not with the adversity of going up to 19,300 feet. And that trip's going to be led by John, and if some of you want to go to the summit, we'll be happy to take you there as well. And then we're hoping to have a couple of days of safari available there as well, and then obviously to visit the sites, see all the extraordinary work that Dr. Jacobson is doing, and visit KCMC Hospital and see some of Dr. Diefenthal's legacy, and hopefully meet Fatma. And then the final thing is just to, make a donation. If you want to make a donation, we're extremely high-tech. Makisha is outside, and Makisha's name hasn't been mentioned yet tonight, but she's an extraordinary person. Makisha is some of the brains behind the development work of FCCT, and in many ways was the future of the organization until she got a new job. And so her last day with FCCT, I think, was on August 1st, but she's going to continue to be involved. But really, a lot of what happened tonight was thanks to her. So she'll be happy to take your credit card and swipe it before you leave. And then you also have this, which is just a little mailer. And so if you want to give this to a friend, you can just fill this out and mail it in, and there's envelopes out there on your way out. So thank you very, very much for having me here tonight, and then I'll turn it back over to John.